Okay. Question 10. How do I quit alcohol? All right. So you've decided through whatever process that you want to quit alcohol, right? An important consideration here is that you are going to do this for yourself, right? Not because someone else asks you to or expects you to. And that can often happen. We realize that, yeah, we have a problem and we need to fix it. We agree with our partner or significant other in our life. And we say, yep, okay, I'm going to stop drinking. But in your gut, you're thinking, I don't want to stop. Or, internally, all those fears come up about stopping drinking, but you don't talk about those. So essentially, you're doing this for somebody else. Well, the problem with that is it's not going to stick. It might work for a while, but eventually, you'll go back to where you were before. Now, your experience going forward is going to depend on what your current level of drinking is and how you're going to go about it. So you could go do it yourself, which is what I did. So going cold turkey is one way to do it. You could try a gradual reduction. You could do alcohol-free challenges. You could try smart apps to track and journal how you're going with your drinking. To help you along in the journey, you could do meditation and mindfulness. But what you want to do is work out why you drink and what you believe about alcohol, and then try all of the above. Experiment, be curious. Don't judge yourself though. You could also seek expert help. So you could look at alcohol coaching or sobriety coaching, which is what I do. You could do CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy. So a professional psychologist could help you with that, or a professional therapist. Detox programs with hospitals and organizations, going to the GP and getting medication to support you in giving up drinking. So there are drugs that will help you curb your cravings if that's the case that you have. Um, Naltrexone or diazepam, which is Valium. They might be, if you're a problem drinker but not a really heavy drinker, that might be overkill, but you would have to talk to your doctor about that. Rehab, so in-house or outpatient. So there's organizations that will take you away for a few weeks and you'll attend sessions and work through the various issues and problems that you're having and talk about your drinking and so on. Or you can have outpatient services where you only come in, once a day, maybe get some medication and maybe you see a psychologist or something. All right, so there's lots of different ways to quit alcohol, and no one size fits all. It might be one or two things or a combination of do it yourself and some professional help that gets you over the line. Everybody's different. Everybody's at a certain place along that spectrum, right? So what works for one person fantastically might not work for another person and totally fail. So it sounds a bit discouraging, but there is hope. People do get through it. They do find their way. It's like the weave, weaving in and out and trying different things and getting an understanding of, what you do, why you do it, when you do it, and how it affects you. Just a note of caution though, if you decide that you're going to suddenly stop drinking, that could be dangerous if you're said to be dependent or physically dependent on alcohol. So you might suffer withdrawal symptoms. Now, they're described as shaking, tremors, excessive sweating, mental confusion, anxiety, racing heart, seizures, delirium, hallucinations, right? They're pretty hardcore and they are a medical emergency and they can be dangerous for your life. Now, roughly 10% of drinkers are physically dependent on alcohol, so it's a small number, and they can suffer withdrawal. So, if you suspect that you are physically dependent, so perhaps you're drinking every day, maybe you're drinking in the morning, maybe you need to drink just to feel normal. Those are the kind of things that indicate, but not always, not 100%, indicate that you might be dependent on alcohol. So before you quit, you need to have a conversation with your GP or a medical professional if you think you are dependent, so that they can advise you and they can check you for withdrawal symptoms. Alrighty, so getting started. So more often than not, it's usually a point where the consequences of your alcohol use outweigh the benefits that you're receiving from the alcohol. So it doesn't have to be the proverbial rock bottom. That's a fallacy. That's like being backed into a corner where you have no choice. And for some people, that is a reality. But for most people, they do have a choice, but they just don't realize it yet. So it might just be that you want to know, what life is like drinking less. And you don't need to have it all figured out before you start. So you don't have to wait for the right time or when. And I call this the tyranny of when. So when the office function is done, when the family gathering is over, when the barbecue at Bill's is done, the birthday, the wedding, the holiday, on and on and on, all these things that we do that are tightly woven with alcohol, we think, okay, when I've got a period of time when these things aren't happening, I'll do it then. But of course, there's always something going on in our busy lives. So the key is to treat it like an experiment, not a lifelong commitment from day one, and just start. Just start small. Try a day here, try a day there, try a week, try a weekend, right? You're not signing this big contract. You're just testing what life feels like with alcohol, our alcohol in the mix, and how to go about it without drinking. So let's run through maybe a do-it-yourself option. So kind of you start with what fits you best. What can you handle? Can you handle, reading and listening to podcasts? Because that will give you a good understanding of how alcohol works in the body, right? We want to learn that willpower, even though we rely on it when we first stop, we need to know that it is actually unsustainable. It's like a muscle. So if we go cold turkey, eventually it'll wear out. So we might be able to withstand the thoughts and things that come into our brain, no, I'm not going to drink today. No, no, not happening. And then, suddenly you cave, something happens, and your willpower kind of collapses. The things that play into that are things like your subconscious beliefs, and they will tend to sabotage your best intentions if you don't know what they are. Now, we're talking about the subconscious is like the unknown. How do we know about that? Well, this is where some of the experts can help us defining what these subconscious beliefs are and how to work on them. There might be some very common ones that we can knock off, with a book or something like that. But then some of the other ones that might be very personal subconscious beliefs that might need the help of an expert to get those out. Uh, Something else you could do, try a 30-day experiment, no pressure, just curiosity, and just see how your body, your mood, your sleep, and your social life respond. But try and avoid the idea of just getting through it as if it's a proof of concept. I've got through my 30 days. I didn't look at anything. I didn't focus on anything. I just willpower, white knuckle, get through 30 days. Yay, tick box, and go and have a drink. And then you end up drinking for another 30 days and nights. Track your habits. So you could use a journal, just a written journal of what's happening each day, or you could track it with an app. There's quite a few good little apps that you can get on your phone that you can enter in how many drinks you're having, a little spot to say how you feel, um, when you drink, why you drink, what's the benefit, what's the cost to drinking, and so on. If you do have wins, build on them. Congratulate yourself often. If you go a few days or a week alcohol free, treat yourself to coffee and a cake, a night at the cinema. If you have a setback, right? If you have a drink, we call that a data point, right? We're just going along, have a drink. Oh, here's a data point. Learn from this data point. Don't beat yourself up, right? So a data point is an opportunity to learn about what happened. So I was going along my alcohol-free week. I had this compulsion to drink. I drank. Okay, what happened? Why did it happen? Was it something I was thinking of? Was I feeling low? Did I have a fight with a wife? What is it? What can I do better next time? How can I fix it? What can I put in place that might be better? It could be a simple thing, like you're at the pub having your alcohol-free beer, and somebody leans in and says, only weenies drink alcohol-free beer, and that upsets you. And maybe you just go off in a huff. Next time you get a drink, you get a proper one, because you're trying to do the right thing. This person's come in and, how dare they say something like that, and you've decided to have a drink to feel better. Okay. So what could I learn from that? Well, if somebody, maybe somebody does come in and question your drinking, what are you going to say? How are you going to respond? Having that in your mind, if somebody leans in and says something that, practicing laughing it off. Yeah, yeah, mate, I'm a weenie, but I'm doing this for me kind of stuff. Um, Very important not to beat yourself up if you drink, and very important not to continue drinking. Okay, I had a drink, but don't spend another 4 or 5 days in a drinking binge because you had a data point, right? That's just going to mess you up. Other things you can do, swap drinks out. Keep the rituals, keep the Friday knock-off vibe, but pour something alcohol-free, like an alcohol-free beer, a soda and lime, whatever feels right for you. A sparkling water, so you've got the bubbly feel, but there's nothing in there that tastes like beer, for example. Get support, so you don't have to do it solo. Now that could be a coach like myself, it could be a mate, it could be a group. Maybe you do a 30-day challenge with a few of your mates. Having somebody in your corner makes a huge difference on your journey. Learning what your triggers are. So, commonly for people, it's things like stress, boredom is a big one. When we stop drinking for a period of time, we've got all this free time. We're sitting around twiddling our thumbs. What to do? I'm bored. What did I used to do? Oh, I used to have a drink. So that could be a trigger for you kicking off on another drink. Social pressures, they're big ones. So once you spot them, you can plan around them. Don't wait for rock bottom. You're allowed to quit simply because alcohol doesn't add any value anymore to your life. The method that works for you is going to be the one that you will stick with. So remember, you're working on changing what you've possibly been doing for decades. In my case, it was nearly 50 years of drinking. It's going to take time, patience, and effort to unwind your drinking behaviors. And how much time that's going to be depends on the individual. Now, all this might seem daunting, but start small. Stay curious. Don't judge yourself and build the momentum, the small wins. I went a week without alcohol. Fantastic. You might drink for a couple of days, have another go, another 7 days. Build it up, 2 weeks. So starting small and then lengthening the time away from alcohol. Look, some days will be good. Other days you might want to have a drink and you end up having a data point. Remember, a data point gives you permission, an opportunity to evaluate what happened, what you can learn, and what you might do differently because it's all a big experiment, right? Remember to treat yourself as your own best mate. So don't be hard on yourself. Don't judge yourself as weak or pathetic. And as I said before, don't keep drinking if you have a data point. Remember, you're not broken, right? You're ready for something better. And you have a choice. You can choose to try, and maybe you've got to try a couple of times, but eventually you will get there. Okay.